everybody, thanks for coming back to the V8 Jeeps channel. I'm Scrib, my 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee WJ. Just like we've mentioned before, bare naked, getting to be a little less so, very dirty and dusty. Today we've got a lot going on. The point that we're at now, seen the last couple episodes, we've been working on my axles. So at this point we've got these axles all set and ready to go. Got the ball joints replaced, wheel bearings, got everything painted. Got our spring perches replaced from front and rear. Truss, more spring perches, a lot more black paint, and our trail forge track bar mount and steering stabilizer mount. So these are getting ready to go in. Something we're going to have to do today is get all the rough country control arm mounts mounted back onto the frame. If you remember, we put in the frame stiffener kit. That kind of moves the location and position a little bit of all the holes that you have to drill for the mounting of the control arm brackets. When I talk about control arm brackets, what we got here is we've got these guys here for the back, and these bolt onto the frame rail. See this here, and control arm mounts on here. These things have been around with me for a couple years, so they got a simple grinding down real quick and spray paint with black farm implement paint. And then we got to get up underneath here and change the position of where all the holes are for those mounts. Alright, so we made a couple mistakes when we welded on the plates and didn't really pay attention to where the holes were going to be. You got to have a couple big holes in here, here, and here for putting in the flag nuts. I'll show you what those look like here in just a little bit. Those have got to be able to go in there so the bolts that go through the plates can go through here and they have something to thread into. We had to change, or we're going to have to change the position of these holes because everything's going to move down the thickness of the weld-on plates here. So these holes are probably just going to end up getting elongated. We're going to mount the plates on there. We'll mount them in here where they're going to be square and straight, and then we'll use that for a guide to where we have to drill out these holes and move everything a little bit. So it's not going to be anything major, but it's got to be done. Another thing we run into here is it's really hard to tell, but this frame rail has a taper to it. And when it's stock and you put these plates on, there's a little bit of an angle here, and the plates are actually shaped in a way that they're not 90-degree angle. There's a little bit of a slant to it. So I think we're going to have to probably add a little bit of metal in here so there's not a big gap. Actually, we're going to have to do that in here. I've got some strap steel or whatever you want to call it that we're probably going to weld on the mounts just on the very top to suck up some of the gaps so we're not dealing with a bunch of slop in here. We want everything mounted all nice and tight. We had to do a little work to get the front control arm slash transmission cross member installed. Same deal, some of the holes that had to be moved, so there was a lot of drilling and grinding going on last night. And stupidly, we accidentally welded up some of the bolt holes that we thought were plug holes because we weren't paying attention and got carried away when we were doing some welding. So we're going to have to drill this one out right here. You see I've already ground it pretty flat. And just get those mounted up in there so we know everything's square where it's going to be. So that's one of the biggest goals that we have for today, is to get that all accomplished and try to get this thing sitting on its wheels. We want to be able to get it on its wheels, and we want to be able to roll it outside. We have all the bare metal on here where we've welded in this chassis plate. Sorry, the lighting's kind of crappy. Got those in all over, the bottom ones that we were just looking at, and then we've got these in the rear. And these are all going to get the old POR 15 treatment. Part of the POR 15 treatment is you have a etcher, you have a degreaser, you have to go through the steps to properly prepare the surface for the POR 15 to work. I've watched a lot of videos and read quite a bit about it, that it works pretty awesome if you follow the steps properly. If you don't, it's prone to peeling off, and those are the people that are usually disappointed. The process involves very liberally slathering it down with the etcher and degreaser. You got to let it sit for a period of time, then you got to rinse it with water, then you move to the next step. I can't remember think it's the degreaser first, then the etch. And same thing, then you have to wash that off with water, and then you got to let it all dry before you put the paint on. And now that we're blessed with some beautiful weather outdoors here, it's going to be a situation where we are doing this outside. The POR 15 is one chemical, nasty smelling, terrible product. Usually means that it works well. And plus all the degreasing, etching, washing, rinsing, it's just going to be a lot better outside in the gravel driveway. So we need to get her on its wheels. Quite a bit of work involved in that. We're going to have to get it on its wheels, get the suspension on there. I still have things on the suspension I need to replace, but we're going to get it on there so it can roll, get it outdoors so we can move to these other steps. And a lot of the suspension stuff is going to have to come back off. I have things I want to paint and a couple things I want to weld. And I really haven't come up with a very good solid transmission mount for the 4L80 to jive with the rough country cross member where the 545 used to run. So a bunch of little challenges here when you start mixing up parts, but we're learning to go as we go along. Got a great welder. I hate to even call them fabricating skills because they're barely that, but what little bit there is has gotten a little better as time's gone on. So we figure it out while we go. You can't learn anything without trying it. So we're going to get that a whirl. First thing is getting these rear control arm mounts installed, drilled out, and everything where they're supposed to be. Then we're going to move on to the next part. All right, so when we're talking about flag nuts, this is what we're talking about here. These here are going to go up inside the frame rail. There's the holes you have to drill with the hole saw. You feed these up in there, and then these will line up with bolt holes. Then you just run a bolt up inside there, and they thread in. Sorry, the shaky camera stuff's going on here. Those thread in there, and that gives you something that you can bolt control arm mounts to. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. We've got 8 of them here for the rear control arm mounts, and then there's 4 little ones that you have to install in the front for the cross member / front control arm mounts. I've gotten some new hardware. I've got some washers that are going to be involved with it. And something else we're going to have to do here in a little bit is that truss that we put on the rear axle from Trail Forge has a bunch of hardware. So we have to mount, we're using that rough country kit, so we are using the 3-point A-arm, control arm, whatever you want to call it, on the top on the rear suspension. This is some of the hardware for that. And then we also have brake line fittings here because we got to run brake lines on that rear axle also that all get moved and relocated once you add that truss. But that's no big deal. We do brake lines regularly on the 9 to 5 job. So like I said, we're here in Michigan, and they rust, they rot, they blow brake lines and rot all kinds of other things that we deal with here that a lot of you guys would be amazed that even legal to do on the road. So we got to get up underneath there. We got to put these plates on. I keep saying plates, mounts, control arm mounts, whatever you want to call them. Got to put those on there, mount them from the bottom. We're going to use the bottom as a guide. Then we're going to have to see where on the sides that we have to re-drill our holes, elongate them, move them, whatever we're going to have to do there to make it all work. And then when I talked about adding some metal in there to make up for the gap, because everything's more square now than tapered like the frame rails are originally. I've got this piece of steel here that we're going to be cutting some pieces off and probably welding them on to the control arm mounts to make up for the gap. And then once we all bolt it all together and tighten it all down, everything will be snug, and there shouldn't be any kind of slop. You can't have that in your suspension. It's got to be safe. Not only does this thing go through all kinds of stress, twisting and torsional stress, off-roading, it's also going to have a 600 plus horsepower LSX power in it. And on the road, everything needs to hold together. Never really had any kind of problem with that. This lift kit that I have right now has actually been on 2 different Jeeps and has been through all kinds of roads. If you don't know bad roads, take a drive in Michigan, you'll find out what bad roads are. So between the crappy roads, potholes, and just off-road use, everything's all held up real good. I don't think it's all going to wear out. And I say everything, there's one exception. The joints that Rough Country uses, the big, large spherical joints or whatever you call them on the ends of the control arms are garbage. They warranted them for me 3 times, and literally within less than 500 to 1,000 miles, they're loose, worn out, clunking and rattling, and they're just junk. So we got new joints from Johnny Joint, and I've already replaced those on the rear. The front ones I hadn't replaced yet, and that is a huge upgrade for any of you that have any of these rough country kits, whether it's for the WJ, JKs, TJs, you name it, that have these big joints on them. Throw them away, get them from Johnny Joint. They don't creak, they don't clunk, they don't rattle, and so far they've lasted thousands or more miles than rough country crap. So when we're talking about the joints, this is what we've got here. We're not talking about something your Uncle Carl rolled up and smelled kind of funny or skunky when you were a little kid. We're talking about suspension joints at this point. Here's one of the rough country ones. Now, of course, this is dirty and doesn't look like a fair comparison compared to a new part, but this is what we've got. They've got these joints in here. They look pretty awesome, but they're not. They have some kind of plastic bushing inside here that wears out in about 2.5 minutes, and they're just complete crap. The other problem I had is I've had some of these snap rings, you see the snap ring in there, especially on the top of the rear axle. I've had a snap ring pop out of there so many times that it was a big safety issue. Put a brand new joint in there, go take a turn, and have that thing pop out, and then all of a sudden you've got this much slop in the rear end on that bracket, and it makes for a dangerous situation. I ended up having to get a small cutoff wheel, cut the groove deeper that the snap ring goes into, and then go around and put a couple spot welds on it so it was impossible for it to come out. That's the only way I've ever had the rear one hold up for more than 5 miles. Geometry of my suspension isn't all out of whack or anything like that. That's definitely been all checked. I had a lot of conversations with rough country. This was a few years ago, and they really didn't have any answers for me. They just kept sending me another joint, and so on. It just didn't do the trick. Once we put the Johnny Joint in there on the rear, never had another problem again, and I didn't have to modify it or doctor it or anything to make it safe to operate. So when we're talking about a Johnny Joint, this is what we've got here. These are built completely differently than the rough country joints. I believe that they are rebuildable. You know, you can take them apart, snap ring there, everything comes apart. But so far, I've replaced all 3 of these in the rear suspension. Ran it about 5,000 miles, and absolutely no issues, no clunks, no creaks, no slop, you name it. Keep them greased a little bit, and that helps them live, but this is a far superior upgrade. And I think these are made by Rock Jock. Cannot remember exactly who I bought these from. I had a couple companies that sell their own products, like Metal Cloak, who claim that nothing exists for these, and that they told me it was rough country had some proprietary thread pitch and blah blah blah. It was a load of crap. They just wanted some of their parts or their lift kit. So don't remember who I got these from, but they're out there. I don't have the measurements right offhand. They're all normal thread, and they got to be about this length to thread inside there. They are slightly shorter than the rough country joints, but that doesn't really matter. There's a ton of thread engagement, and we're talking about something that's pretty damn huge and big around. So just my food for thought there. Even if you're buying a brand new rough country long arm kit, you're not going to get a good life out of those. So try it, do the best you can. I've seen some people online say they've had no issues. Don't know what I'm talking about. Then I've seen the other 75, 85% of everybody with these setups that have nothing but complaints about using these joints. So that's one big upgrade that you'd like to do, go to a superior product. All right, so I'm underneath here, and I want to show you guys how these flag nuts work. This is actually an existing hole from the body. That's where you're going to mount the control arm bracket to. The way these flag nuts work is they go up through here in this hole, and then they go, and as you can see here, they line up with your bolt holes. So then you have something to bolt onto. You're going to have 2 here that go down there on the bottom, and then up top we've got to feed these guys in here and line them up with this bolt hole. And basically there's going to be 4 bolts that hold that bracket on there. As we discussed a little while ago here, these holes are going to be in different spots now because we've added this amount of thickness here, so everything's going to have to move down to make up for that. So our gauge is going to be the existing holes down here in the bottom, and then we're going to modify everything as much as we have to get these holes all to line up so we can bolt them on safely and securely. Alright, so we got this control arm mount on there. A lot of help from my buddy and my new cameraman, and he's going to back up the camera and show you what we got. So we got a couple bolts in there loose, and then as you see, we've got this gap up here that we've got to do something about. As soon as this gets tightened down, exactly, so we got to fix those holes just like Zachariah said. But the problem we've got here is if I mount it flat to the bottom here, then we've got a gap up here. So we got to make up for that gap with that strap steel that I bought. Put that weld the strip on there, so this is all nice and tight. Put our flag bolts in and our other bolts, and then we can mount the
camera holder or something, like when they put the cameras down, they
Yep. Alright, so we've got this control arm mount sitting up on here. I've just got the bottom bolts in, one there, and you get an idea of where we ended up with our bolt holes. Everything moved down the thickness of the frame stiffeners, so we're going to have to elongate these holes. That's the only option we're going to have. The only other problem we got here, like we just discussed, is the fact that this isn't square. It's either going to be flat to the bottom and have a gap up here. See there, you can see the gap. It's not really tightened down, so it's not that much of a gap, but you get one way or the other. So we're going to take that strap steel, we're going to put it on the inside here, just cut out a piece and weld it up here, so then that gap's made up, and I think that'll be pretty stout. So that's going to be our next step here, is making those parts. We do have to still go back over here to the other side, and still got to mount the plate on there to some degree so we can drill this hole out right here, the one that we accidentally welded. And I'm sorry about my lighting, I'm juggling a few things here at once, but we're going to get that up on there, get that mounted, get all these holes that don't line up straightened out and where they need to be, and then we can mount the rear axle in here. So let's get at this. Alright, this gives you the gist of what we're working with here. I've got this strap steel, about 1/4 inch thick I think, and we're going to cut out a piece and we're going to weld it right on here. Of course we're going to trim it to fit a little bit better, but that should be enough to make up our gap that we have now that we've changed things around on the frame rail. And it's about perfect size. It's going to miss the bolt holes, it's not going to interfere or block anything, and I think that's going to solve the problem. So got out the old chop saw over here. I'm going to measure this and cut it off and make 2 of them, of course. We'll get this all prepped and cleaned up, get the welder out, get it welded on, and get this all bolted together. Okay, so we got the brackets on. I've got the bottom all on here on the driver's side, bolted on tight. You'll see, best you can see there, that the metal I added inside there is very tight and right up against the frame rail there. My lighting's kind of crappy, so it's hard to see. And then you can also see, if I move this light to a good spot, that our holes don't line up. So they're going to be slots now. We're going to have to elongate them. There's no other option, so that's the route we're going to take. Then if we go over here, quite the opposite. This one here I've got bolted on the side, but we've got to get underneath here, and well, I guess I already did drill the holes. So we got to get the captive nuts up inside there and get that bolted on, and this side's good to go. Again, this is all temporary. It's all going to come back off, get painted and everything. Right now I just want to get it on its wheel so we can get it outside. We're going to grab the old drill bit. We're just going to use these holds, the holes on the bracket as a guide, and drill those holes out and get some bolts in there. Really, this is good enough to roll it out, but while I'm at this point, I want to get all the holes and all drilling and cutting and all that straightened out before we go too far. So I'm going to grab the drill and get going on this. One thing I can tell you that has not been fun about any of this business underneath here is all the hot metal chips. About to make some more and get these holes done. My goodness. Alright, that one's drilled through. Alright, that one's through too. So we're in good shape. So I'm going to stick the bolts through there just for the heck of it, and then we're going to get in there and start putting some of this rear suspension on so we can set it down. Keep in mind we still got to get up here to the front and got quite a bit to put together there. So give me a few minutes to get all this in there, and then we're going to move to the next step here. Alright, those are in there nice and tight. This is not going anywhere, and I'm pretty happy with that. It's also nice, this thing's been apart for so long. Really nice to see some of this stuff coming back together. I didn't know how this was all going to work out, and while we've been in the midst of doing work on other parts of this, I've just been left to wonder how everything's going to bolt together and what a pain in the butt it was going to be to drill through everything, but not a problem at all. It's all worked out pretty good.